Read. One more free chair right up here in the front row for anyone? Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Books and Books in Coral Gables. Thank you all for coming down tonight. Before beginning tonight's event, I'd like to ask everyone to please silence their cell phones. Also want to remind everyone we have events like this almost every night at Books and Books, and you can grab a calendar of events at the counter. If you'd like more information about the many events we have here at Books and Books, for example, just next week we're having our own Edwidge Danticat is going to be appearing here at the store. So please visit the website to learn about all our events. And if you do not already receive email announcements from us, we have a clipboard going around the audience. We'd be very happy if you signed up for email announcements so you could find out about all the stuff we have going on. We're so eager to have people sign up for email that at the end of the month we're going to be having a raffle for a gift card for folks who have signed up for email. And just to be fair to our customers of long standing, we'll also raffle off a gift card for them. One more bit of business. We're live streaming the event tonight on the internet. So folks watching at home, if you'd like a copy of the book and have Dr. Epstein sign it for you, we'd be happy to take care of that for you. And during the question and answer period, if you could raise your hand before asking the question, then a guy with a boom mic is going to be coming around so the folks at home will be able to hear your question. Don't be shy. This evening, Books and Books is very pleased to welcome Dr. Mark Epstein and his new book, The Trauma of Everyday Life. And we are also very pleased to have a special introducer. He is the author of such books as Many Lives, Many Masters, Mirrors of Time, and Miracles Happen. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Brian Weiss.
Thank you. I'll be brief. Welcome. It's great to see such a wonderful group here, such a big crowd, and welcoming the live streaming also. It's a pleasure for me, an honor to welcome Mark Epstein to Books and Books. I've been coming here for so many years. It's a preeminent bookstore, independent bookstore in the country, and everybody seems to know about it. So it's like a convergence of really good things happening tonight. I'll talk about The Trauma of Everyday Life in a moment. It's an excellent book. It's wonderful. I read it this weekend. I really love it. It's great at so many levels. I can't even begin to describe it. My favorite parts were when you talk about yourself and about the Buddha and the psychiatric parts also, but not quite at the same level. And yet it all fits together like a beautiful whole thing coming together to make a wonderful series of points about suffering and trauma. I came from a completely similar background, psychiatry, but skeptical. So I didn't have Mark's path through Buddhism. I came about it as many of you know, from a completely what seemed to be at that moment serendipitous, although now I no longer believe in coincidences, occurrence with a patient of mine who started having past life memories while we were using hypnosis to find traumas in her childhood. Just dawned on me, traumas. So that was the door for me too. But I was very skeptical about past lives and reincarnation, knowing nothing about it. And the story of her healing through using past life therapy. And she was a Catholic woman from New England, not believing in it either, in reincarnation or past lives. That story is in Many Lives, Many Masters. And that was the door for me, the door that opened to the whole spiritual world. Quickly, I received a lot of support from Eastern religions, Hinduism and Buddhism. And as I've traveled the world, I've continued to receive this support for the work, and I recognize the similarity of my work with what Mark has been writing about in the Buddhist concepts. For me, that was a real eye-opener and opened my mind. I was a bit closed-minded, and that's not a good state to be in, especially for psychiatrists, but everything changed for me, and it took a trauma to open my mind, too, although I didn't conceptualize it quite in the same way. Now, reading The Trauma of Everyday Life, I see things a little more clearly, I believe. As psychiatrists are always learning. We never stop. We incorporate everything as a self-learning device. So as I was reading The Trauma of Everyday Life, it dawned on me how many overlaps we have too. And just thoughts and memories kept coming back to me. Every page I read, you write stories that might seem not so important, like about your toast and not being mindful of eating the toast, and so then it was gone, and that causes a trauma. And of course, as a psychiatrist, I relate to the trauma, and I go through the same thing all the time. And it reminded me of the story of the cup of tea that Thich Nhat Hanh talks about, and that helped me understand mindfulness. And then my own experiences with mindfulness, I teach a lot at Omega Institute, and you teach there too, another overlap. And John Kabat-Zinn, a good friend of mine, teaches there, and I took his course on mindfulness when we were teaching at their satellite program in St. John together. So that opened my mind to all the benefits of that. So reading about mindfulness and the importance of that in The Trauma of Everyday Life brought all of those memories back to me as well. Then I started thinking about Jack Kornfield and his wonderful books on Buddhist psychology and the similarities there. Our worlds were overlapping even more. And Roger Kamenetz, a friend and a great writer too. So in all these ways, I was relating at many, many levels to Mark's new book. And it's a great book. The other books were really good too. This is like, I've read them. This is better, yeah, right. I hesitated to say that, but this is the best, I think, because it's the most complete. And you go through, as writers, go through a process. It's like a sublimation, and it gets better and better as you burn off the old stuff. So this is the best, and it's not only effective, but it's important, because it's, how to put this, in my work, I kept coming across the concept of suffering and dukkha, and that's, of course, what the Buddha was talking about. And I think, as you explain, how that relates to trauma and the concepts of trauma, hardship, suffering, everything was really fitting together. And we all go through this. I've been writing about it in different ways. I know in some of my travels through China and Japan, they were telling me there how I was inadvertently, I guess, teaching Buddhist concepts, because I was finding that in my work. But to me, it was all mystical. So it could be in Kabbalah, it can be in Buddhism and mystical Christianity. But I was teaching like at a elementary school level, and this is high school or college. It's there. I'm not as conversant with many of the terms, but I've been teaching about mindfulness, about compassion and empathy, and the importance of love, of kindness, of loving kindness. And this is what I keep finding. In addition to reincarnation and life after death, and it doesn't all stop with physical death, all of these things that I was finding, Mark takes this to a higher level in this book. So it's with profound happiness and joy that I get to present you to this wonderful group of people. Welcome to Mark.
Well, we should let Brian talk longer, I think. It was so lovely. Thank you. For those of you who don't know my work, just before I start to read, I am a psychiatrist, which means I went to medical school. Most of what I do is one-on-one psychotherapy with patients in my office in New York. I've taken one day a week over the years to write in, so this book is a number of years of one day a week writing. I had the fortunate but unusual experience of learning about Buddhism when I was quite young, meaning in college, but before I could even imagine going to medical school or being a psychiatrist, being a therapist. So I immersed myself as much as I could in Buddhism, then proceeded on the Western path. And I was always interested in how much of what I was learning, training as a Western psychotherapist, how much of it was consistent with what I had already learned from Buddhism. So in my writing, which I've been engaged in for the past 30-odd years already, much of my work has been about trying to talk about how the two worlds, the Eastern world of Buddhist thought in particular for me, and the Western world of psychoanalytic psychotherapy, which is what was most interesting to me, how those worlds were actually speaking the same language, not different languages, and how the understanding of one could actually help with an understanding of the other. So my vision has always been of a synthetic kind of approach, because for me, when I was starting out, I wasn't really discriminating between Buddhist and psychoanalytic. I was just looking for help for myself, and I was pulling from wherever I could find it. And when I'm now working as a therapist with people, that's the same kind of approach that I've been taking, just pulling from anywhere and trying to help whatever comes out of me. I figure if it's done any good, it should be evident in my own person. So this book, The Trauma of Everyday Life, it started out, I think I wanted to write originally about the relationship between attachment and non-attachment. Attachment in the Western psychological sense of healthy attachment. Babies need a healthy attachment to their mothers. We all want a healthy attachment to our spouses, to our children, to our parents, etc. But the Buddhist teachings are all about non-attachment. And is that, the Buddha left his wife and young child, and that's always a little scary when we hear about it. Is the non-attachment, is that flying in the face of the attachment that we in the West recognize as an important thing? And what I realized is that trauma is actually underlying both attachment and non-attachment. That if there's trauma in early life, which psychotherapists call developmental or relational trauma, if there's trauma in early life, it makes attachment in the psychological sense difficult. And if there's trauma in the early life or later in life, and there's always trauma, as I try to talk about in the book, if there's too much trauma, it makes non-attachment difficult. Because in order to really experience the non-attachment that the Buddha talked about, you have to first know what you're attached to. You have to be a whole person. And what happens in trauma is that it's too overwhelming. So the ego needs to preserve itself. It has to stop itself from fragmenting. So the traumatic aspect of things gets shunted to one side. So it's very hard to be unattached to what you don't know you've experienced. So I'm going to read you some bits, and then stop for a little while, take some questions, and then I'll finish with one or two other pieces from the book, okay? So, clear-eyed, compassionate, and awake, the Buddha was a realist. With no dust obscuring his vision, he was able to sum up the entire human predicament in a single word. Dukkha, he exclaimed in his first noble truth, as he held to his vow to speak the beneficial truth, even if it was disagreeable. Suffering. Its reality permeates our lives, shadowing the good times and insinuating itself into everything. Trauma is a basic fact of life, according to the Buddha. It is not just an occasional thing that happens only to some people. It is there all the time. Things are always slipping away. Although there are occasions when it is more pronounced and awful, and occasions when it is actually horrific, trauma does not just happen to a few unlucky people. It is the bedrock of our biology. Churning, chaotic, and unpredictable, our lives are stretched across a tenuous canvas. Much of our energy goes into resisting this fragility, yet it is there nonetheless. The Buddha found it useful to put people in touch with their vulnerability, yet he had one important qualification to his dictum to always speak the constructive but distasteful truth. Only if he knew the time to say it would he confront people with their traumas. Only if the relationship could sustain it would he gentle them into themselves. In specifying this, the Buddha was making an important point, one not lost on today's therapists. Trauma becomes sufferable, even illuminating, when there is a relational home to hold it in. Without this, it is simply too much to bear. The Buddha did not come to this understanding out of nowhere. His own personal journey involved coming to terms with the loss of a mother he, for all intents and purposes, never knew. As therapists who specialize in developmental or relational trauma have come to realize, the first few years of life are critical for one's self-esteem and self-confidence. The healthy attachment of a baby to a good enough parent facilitates a comfort with emotional experience that makes the challenges of adult life and adult intimacy less intimidating. When there is serious malattunement in early life, however, there is often a traumatic residue that manifests in surprising and disturbing ways. The Buddha, like many of us, acted out this residue. Abandoning his wife and child, debasing himself in the forest, striving to liberate himself from his mind and body, his spiritual journey can be read, from one perspective at least, as an expression of primitive agony. As one of today's leading neuroscientists, Joseph Ledoux, has put it after studying the impact of stress on the brain, emotional memory may be forever. The Buddha's mother, which this fact is woven through the book, died when he was a week old, which is a well-known thing in Buddhist myth or in Buddhist history, but no one has ever made very much of it. I make a lot of it in this book, and that's what I'm writing around that developmental trauma there. There's one sutra called the Splinter of Rock Discourse, which describes this in very physical terms. When I first came upon it, I liked the title right away. What was the Buddha going to say about a splinter of rock in his foot? In the sutra, the Buddha is surrounded by 700 devas. Devas are godlike beings who often found it edifying to hang around the Buddha, who praise him for his fortitude in enduring the pain of the splinter of rock lodged in his foot. Not complaining at all, the sutra reads, the Buddha endured the pain with mindfulness and comprehension. He lay on his right side on the great robe, which was spread out on the ground, folded fourfold, with one foot slightly further than the other one on which it rested. I was struck by the image of the Buddha nursing a painful wound. Even though he was a Buddha, he was still subject to pain. While I knew it was not a psychological wound, I could not help imagining that it might be. I read the concluding stanza avidly, curious about what advice he might give to his admiring audience of otherworldly beings. In this world, he who is conceited lacks self-control, the Buddha said. He who abandons conceit, who has a tranquil mind, and who has wisdom, is free from all existence. A forest dweller leading a